There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists in a small town after the sun goes down. It's not peace. It's an absence. An emptiness that lets you hear things you shouldn't. The whisper of the wind can start to sound like a name. The rustle of leaves can mimic footsteps. You tell yourself it's just your imagination, that you've seen too many movies. But in some towns, the stories are real. The whispers are warnings. And the silence is where the horror lives. Tonight, I'm going to share 8 of them with you. These aren't tales of fiction. They're the real experiences of people who lived in a place where everyone knows your name, but no one knows your secrets. Let's begin. My granddad used to say that Stillwater Creek wasn't a town, so much as a scar. A long, jagged line of houses and a single, struggling general store carved into the thick woods of northern Idaho. He'd lived there his whole life, and in his 78 years, he claimed the population had never broken 100. People were born there, and people died there. That was the rhythm of the place. Simple, unchanging, until the summer of '98. The summer the Skinner came. I was 16, sent up from Boise to spend the summer with my grandparents. My folks were going through a messy divorce, and I guess they figured the clean mountain air would do me some good. Or maybe they just needed a place to stash me for a few months. Either way, I found myself in a town where the most exciting thing to happen all year was the annual bake sale. For the first few weeks, it was exactly as boring as I'd imagined. I'd spend my days helping Granddad chop wood, or fishing in the creek that gave the town its name. The water was so clear you could count the pebbles on the bottom. The fish were plentiful. It was peaceful. Deceptively so. The first strange thing happened in early July. A couple of deer, found by Old Man Hemlock on the edge of his property. They were laid out neat as you please, side by side. And they'd been skinned. Not just skinned, but stripped clean. There wasn't a scrap of flesh left on their bones. It was like something you'd see in a biology textbook. Perfectly articulated skeletons, gleaming white in the morning sun. Granddad was on the volunteer fire department, which also doubled as the town's everything else department. He and a few other old-timers went out to take a look. They came back with their faces grim. They'd seen bear attacks, cougar kills. This was neither. The cuts were too clean, too precise, and the hides were gone, vanished without a trace. A week later, it was a black bear, a big one, found in the same state. Stripped bare, its magnificent pelt gone. Now people were getting scared. You see, in a town like Stillwater Creek, hunting isn't a sport, it's a way of life. People knew animals. They knew what they were capable of. And this was something else. The old-timers started whispering about a poacher, but that didn't sit right with me. Poachers are usually messy. They take what they want and leave the rest. This was surgical, ritualistic, almost. The nights in Stillwater Creek were the darkest I'd ever known. There were no streetlights, no glow from a distant city. Just the moon and the stars, and the suffocating blackness of the forest. I started hearing things at night. A high-pitched whistling, almost like a bird, but wrong somehow. It would drift through the trees, just on the edge of hearing. I told my granddad about it, and he just nodded slowly, his eyes distant. He'd heard it too. The fear in the town was a palpable thing. It hung in the air, thick and heavy like the smell of pine after a rain. People stopped letting their pets out at night. Then they stopped letting their kids play outside after dusk. The general store started closing before sunset. The familiar, friendly faces of the townsfolk were replaced with masks of suspicion and anxiety. Everyone was a stranger. Then, the Skinner took a dog. The Hendersons' golden retriever, Bess. She was an old, sweet dog, beloved by the whole town. They found her skeleton under their porch. Her collar was placed neatly on top of her gleaming skull. That's when the men of the town decided to take matters into their own hands. They formed a hunting party. Not for any animal, but for the man, or the thing, that was doing this. My granddad, despite his age, was one of the first to volunteer. I begged him not to go. I had a terrible, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. but he just patted my shoulder and told me that some things a man just had to do. They were out for 2 days. I barely slept. I sat by the window watching the woods, listening to that god-awful whistling that seemed to be getting closer each night. On the 3rd day, the hunting party came back. Or what was left of it. They were pale and shaken. 2 of the men were missing. Old man Hemlock and a younger guy named Dave. They'd split up, they said. Hemlock and Dave had gone to check a ridge to the north. The others had waited. They'd heard a scream. A single, terrified scream that was cut off abruptly. They'd rushed to the spot, but there was nothing. No sign of a struggle. No blood. No tracks that didn't belong to them. Just a single, skinning knife stuck deep into a tree, and hanging from the handle, by a leather thong, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. The state police were called in. They searched for a week. They found nothing. Hemlock and Dave were gone. Vanished from the face of the earth. The official story was that they'd gotten lost, maybe fallen into a ravine, but everyone in Stillwater Creek knew the truth. The Skinner had taken them. The whistling stopped after that, and there were no more skinned animals. It was like the thing had gotten what it wanted and moved on. But the town was never the same. The scar had deepened. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was watchful, waiting. I left at the end of the summer, and I never went back. My grandparents moved to Boise a year later. They never spoke of what happened, but I could see it in their eyes. The memory of that summer was a shadow that would never leave them. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear it. That high-pitched, unnatural whistle. And I'm 16 again, in a small town in Idaho, staring into the suffocating darkness of the woods, knowing that something is staring back. And it's smiling. There's a stretch of road just outside of my hometown, a little place called Harmony in rural Pennsylvania, that the locals call the Weeping Mile. The official name is Blackwood Road, but no one's called it that for as long as I can remember. It's a narrow, winding ribbon of asphalt, shaded by a canopy of ancient, gnarled trees that blot out the sun even on the brightest of days. It's the kind of road that makes the hair on your arms stand up for no good reason. And if you have to drive it at night, you do it fast. You don't stop. For anything, the legend of the Weeping Woman of Blackwood Road is as old as the town itself. They say she was a young woman who lost her baby in a carriage accident on that road, way back in the 1800s. And now, her spirit wanders the Weeping Mile, forever searching, forever grieving. A classic ghost story, right? The kind of thing you tell your friends at a sleepover to give them a good scare. That's what I thought too. Until the night I saw her. I was 17, and it was the night of the homecoming dance. I was driving my girlfriend, Sarah, home. It was late, close to 1 in the morning. I'd had my driver's license for less than a year, and my dad's old Ford pickup was not the most reliable of vehicles. But it was a clear, crisp autumn night, and the stars were out in full force. We were happy, carefree, the kind of invincible that only teenagers can feel. To get to Sarah's house, you had to take Blackwood Road. It was the only way. As we turned onto the Weeping Mile, the temperature seemed to drop. The happy, upbeat song on the radio was replaced with a burst of static. I fiddled with the dial, but all I could get was a faint, crackling noise. Sarah shivered and pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I hate this road," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the radio. "It's just a road, Sarah," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The stories are just stories. And then we saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, bathed in the glow of my headlights. A tall, slender figure in a long white dress. Her face was obscured by a veil of long dark hair. She was perfectly still, her arms at her sides. But it was the sound that got to me. A low, guttural sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. It cut through the cab of the truck and settled deep in my bones. I slammed on the brakes. The old Ford skidded to a halt just a few feet from her. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the weeping figure in the road. What do we do? Sarah's voice was a choked whisper. I didn't have an answer. My mind was screaming at me to floor it, to drive right through her if I had to. But my body was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so primal, so absolute, that it defied all logic. Then, she moved. She lifted her head, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to see her face. But her hair was too thick, too matted. She took a step towards us, and another. Her movements were slow, jerky, like a marionette with its strings tangled. The sobbing grew louder, more frantic. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. That's when the truck died. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then fell silent. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging us into an almost total darkness. The only light was the faint, silvery glow of the moon, filtering through the dense canopy of trees. The woman in white was a pale, ghostly silhouette against the blackness of the road. Sarah started to cry, her small, frightened sobs a stark contrast to the unholy wailing of the woman outside. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I tried the headlights. Nothing. We were trapped. The woman was at my window now. I could hear her long, ragged fingernails scraping against the glass. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, amplified 1,000 times. The sobbing was right in my ear, a wet, desperate sound that made me want to claw my own ears off. I could smell her, a cloying, sickly, sweet scent of damp earth and decay. I don't know how long we sat there, huddled together in the dark, listening to the weeping woman of Blackwood Road try to get into my truck. It felt like an eternity. Every second stretched into a lifetime. I was convinced we were going to die, that she was going to tear the doors off their hinges and drag us out into the night. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The sobbing ceased. The scratching at the window was gone. There was only silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise that had preceded it. For a long time, we didn't move. We just sat there, straining our ears for any sound, any sign that she was still out there. Finally, I worked up the courage to try the ignition again. The engine roared to life. The headlights blazed, illuminating the empty road ahead. She was gone. I didn't wait to see if she would come back. I threw the truck in reverse, spun it around, and sped away from Blackwood Road as fast as the old Ford would take me. I didn't slow down until the familiar, comforting lights of harmony were in view. We never talked about what happened that night. Not really. We didn't have to. We had shared something that no one else would ever understand. A glimpse into a world that wasn't supposed to exist. A world of sorrow and rage, and things that go bump in the night. I still live in harmony. And every now and then, when I have to drive past the entrance to Blackwood Road, I feel a cold dread creep up my spine. I think of the woman in white, forever searching for her lost child. And I wonder what would have happened if she had gotten into the truck. What would she have done to us? And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the core, that I don't want to find out. My family moved to rural Nebraska in the fall of 2005. My dad had gotten a job managing a large agricultural co-op, and the move was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us, a chance to escape the noise and the crime of the city for the peace and quiet of the heartland. Our new house was a big, old farmhouse, surrounded on all sides by endless fields of corn. At first, it was idyllic. The vast, open spaces were a welcome change from the cramped confines of our old apartment. But as the days grew shorter and the corn grew taller, a strange, unsettling feeling began to take root. The cornfields were alive. That's the only way I can describe it. They whispered and rustled, even on the calmest of days. The stalks, which were well over 10 feet tall, created a dense, impenetrable wall that seemed to press in on the house from all sides. At night, the wind would howl through the rows, creating a sound that was eerily similar to human voices, a chorus of faint, indistinct whispers that seemed to be calling my name. I was 12 at the time, and my younger sister, Emily, was 8. We were both city kids, used to the constant hum of traffic and the glow of streetlights. The profound silence and darkness of the countryside were unnerving, especially the cornfields. Emily was terrified of them. She claimed she saw things in the corn, small, shadowy figures that darted between the rows, their eyes glowing like hot coals in the twilight. My parents, of course, dismissed it as an overactive imagination. They were busy with the move, with their new jobs. They didn't have time for ghost stories. But I saw them too. Fleeting glimpses of small, hunched figures moving through the corn at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it was something more. The first real incident happened a few weeks after we moved in. Emily and I were playing in the yard, just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was a fiery canvas of orange and purple, and the cornfields were cast in long, dancing shadows. Emily was on the swing set, and I was pushing her. We were laughing happy, for the first time in a long time. Then, Emily stopped laughing. Her face went pale, and her eyes were fixed on the edge of the cornfield. "They're watching us," she whispered, her voice trembling. I followed her gaze, and I saw them. Not just one or two, but dozens of them. Small, child-sized figures, standing just inside the first row of corn. They were completely still, their silhouettes dark against the setting sun. I couldn't make out their features, but I could feel their eyes on us. A cold, malevolent stare that seemed to pierce right through me. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her off the swing. "Inside," I said, my voice tight with fear. "No." We ran into the house and locked the door behind us. My mom was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. She took one look at our terrified faces and knew something was wrong. We told her what we'd seen. She went to the window and looked out at the cornfield. But there was nothing there. Just the endless rows of corn, swaying gently in the evening breeze. She told us we had just been seeing things, that the setting sun can play tricks on your eyes. But I saw the flicker of fear in her own eyes. She had felt it too. The wrongness of that place. After that night, things got worse. We would hear scratching at the windows and doors, long after my parents had gone to bed. The whispers from the cornfield grew louder, more distinct. They were calling for Emily. "Come and play with us." They would whisper, their voices a sibilant, hissing sound that made my blood run cold. Emily started having nightmares. She would wake up screaming, talking about the cornfield children. She said they wanted to take her away, to make her one of them. My parents were at their wits' end. They took her to a doctor, who prescribed her sleeping pills. But the nightmares continued. One night, I woke up to find Emily's bed empty. I knew, with a sickening certainty, where she had gone. I ran downstairs and out into the yard. The moon was full, casting a ghostly, silvery light over the cornfields. And there, standing at the edge of the corn, was Emily. She was in her white nightgown, her long, blonde hair blowing in the wind. She was holding hands with one of the cornfield children. It was small and emaciated, its skin the color of dry earth. Its eyes were large and black, completely devoid of any light or emotion, and it was smiling, a wide, lipless grin that stretched from ear to ear. More of them were emerging from the corn, their small, shadowy forms surrounding my sister. They were all smiling that same, horrifying smile. "Emily!" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. She turned to look at me, and my heart stopped. Her eyes were black just like theirs, and she was smiling. That same empty, soulless smile. I don't know what came over me then. A wave of adrenaline, of pure, protective rage. I ran towards them, screaming Emily's name. The cornfield children hissed and recoiled, their black eyes widening in what looked like surprise. They released Emily's hand and melted back into the corn, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. I grabbed Emily and pulled her back towards the house. She was limp, unresponsive. It was like she was in a trance. I got her back inside and locked the door. My parents had been woken up by my screaming. They came rushing downstairs to find me holding a catatonic Emily in my arms. We left the next day. We packed what we could and we drove away from that house, from those fields, and we never looked back. My dad quit his job. We lost a lot of money on the house, But none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting Emily away from there. It took a long time for Emily to come back to us. She was quiet and withdrawn for months. The light didn't return to her eyes for almost a year. She never spoke of what happened that night, and I never asked her to. I don't know what those things in the cornfield were. The ghosts of children who had gotten lost in the fields. Some ancient, elemental spirits of the land. All I know is that they were real, and they wanted my sister. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see them. Their small, shadowy forms. Their black, empty eyes. And that terrible, terrible smile. The Ozarks in late autumn are a thing of breathtaking beauty. The rolling hills are ablaze with color, a patchwork quilt of red, orange, and gold. The air is crisp and clean, with the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. It's a place that feels ancient primal, a place where the veil between worlds feels thin. I should know. I grew up there, and I know that for all its beauty, there's a darkness in those hills, a darkness that comes with the fog. My grandfather was a storyteller. He had a million tales about the strange and unexplained things that happened in the Ozarks. Stories of Willow, the wisps leading travelers astray, of spectral hounds with eyes of fire, of a creature he called the Ozark Howler, a monstrous, cat-like beast with a cry that could curdle your blood. I loved his stories, but I never really believed them. They were just folk tales, right? Campfire stories to scare the tourists. I was wrong. I was 19, home from college for Thanksgiving break. It had been raining for 3 days straight, a cold, miserable drizzle that had turned the dirt roads around our house into a muddy quagmire. On the 4th day, the rain stopped, but a thick, soupy fog rolled in, blanketing the hills in a shroud of gray. It was the kind of fog that swallows sound, that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. My dad asked me to take the old Jeep and go check on my grandparents. They lived a few miles away, on the other side of a wooded ridge. The phone lines were down, and he was worried about them. I didn't mind. I loved driving in the fog. It was like being in another world. The drive was slow going. The fog was so thick I could barely see the hood of the Jeep. I had to lean out the window to follow the ruts in the road. The woods on either side were a formless, menacing wall of gray. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the squelch of the tires in the mud. I was about halfway to my grandparents' house when I saw it. A dark shape, standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, I realized it was much, much bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. It was standing on its hind legs, and it had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was long and emaciated, covered in what looked like matted, black fur. Its arms were long and spindly, with fingers that ended in long, yellowed claws. But it was the head that was the most terrifying. It was long and narrow, like a wolf's. But its eyes were huge and round and glowed with a faint, reddish light. And it had no mouth, just a smooth, unbroken expanse of skin where its mouth should have been. I froze. The Jeep idled in the middle of the road, its headlights cutting a pathetic little tunnel in the thick fog. The creature just stood there, watching me with those terrible, glowing eyes. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just watched. I felt a cold, paralyzing fear grip me. It was a fear that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. It was a primal, instinctual fear. The fear of a prey animal in the presence of a predator. I don't know how long I sat there, locked in a staring contest with the thing in the road. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. Time seemed to have stopped. My world had shrunk to the cab of that Jeep and the monstrous, silent figure in the fog. Then it tilted its head. A slow, deliberate movement that was somehow more menacing than any sudden lunge would have been. And I heard a sound. A low, clicking noise, like 1,000 insects chirping at once. It was coming from the creature's throat. That's what broke the spell. I slammed the Jeep into reverse and spun the wheel. The tires screamed in protest, but they found purchase in the mud. I didn't care which way I was going. All that mattered was getting away from that thing. I drove like a madman, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see. I just drove until I burst out of the fog and into the familiar clearing where my grandparents' house stood. I stumbled out of the Jeep and ran to the house, pounding on the door like my life depended on it. My grandfather opened the door, a look of concern on his face. I fell into his arms, babbling incoherently about the thing in the road, the thing in the fog. He helped me inside and sat me down at the kitchen table. My grandmother made me a cup of hot, sweet tea. As I drank it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup, I told them what I had seen. When I was finished, my grandfather just nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't skeptical. He looked sad. "You saw the howler," he said, his voice low and solemn. "It's been a long time since anyone's seen it. I was hoping it was gone for good." He told me that the Ozark howler wasn't just a story. It was real, a creature of the fog, an ancient spirit of the hills. He said it only appeared when the fog was thick, when the world was quiet. And he said that to see it was a bad omen, a very bad omen. We stayed at my grandparents' house until the fog lifted the next day. I refused to go back out on those roads in the dark. We drove home in a tense, uncomfortable silence. A week later, my grandfather had a massive heart attack. He died before the ambulance could reach him. I know what you're thinking. It was a coincidence. He was an old man. His time had come. And maybe you're right. But I can't shake the feeling that the thing I saw in the fog had something to do with it. That its appearance was a harbinger of death. A warning. I moved away from the Ozarks after I graduated from college. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The way the fog would roll in and swallow the world. I live in the city now, surrounded by the constant noise and light of millions of people. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in off the lake, I think of that dark, silent figure in the road. I think of its glowing, red eyes, and I feel that same, cold, primal fear. And I know, with a certainty that haunts my waking moments, that some things are better left in the fog. Some things are better left unseen. Silver Creek, Colorado, is a ghost town now. A collection of dilapidated buildings and forgotten memories, slowly being reclaimed by the mountains. But back in the late 90s, when I was a kid, it was still clinging to life. A small, tight-knit community of a few hundred people, most of whom were descended from the miners who had founded the town a century before. Our lives revolved around the old silver mine, the Morning Star, a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain that had been the town's lifeblood for generations. It had been closed for years, deemed too dangerous to work. But the stories never died. They said the Morning Star was haunted, that the ghosts of the miners who had died in its dark, winding tunnels still roamed its depths. They talked of strange lights, of disembodied voices, of tools that would move on their own. As kids, we were both terrified and fascinated by the mine. It was the ultimate test of courage, to sneak past the old, rusted fence and venture into the darkness of the Morning Star. I was 14 the summer my cousin, Jake, came to stay with us. Jake was a year older than me, and he was fearless. He had that reckless, devil-may-care attitude that teenage boys often mistake for bravery. And he became obsessed with the Morning Star. He wanted to go inside. He wanted to see the ghosts for himself. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him the stories my dad had told me. Stories of cave-ins, of poisonous gas, of a thing they called the Tommyknockers, mischievous, malevolent spirits that would lead miners to their doom. But Jake just laughed. He called me a coward, and in the twisted logic of a 14-year-old boy, that was a challenge I couldn't refuse. So, one moonless night in August, we set out for the Morning Star. We had a couple of cheap flashlights and a backpack with some water and snacks. We were woefully unprepared for the reality of what we were about to do. The entrance to the mine was even more intimidating up close. A dark, jagged hole in the mountainside, framed by rotting timbers. A cold, damp wind blew out of the darkness, carrying with it the smell of wet rock and something else. something unpleasant, the smell of decay. Jake, of course, was unfazed. He squeezed through a gap in the fence and grinned back at me, his face a pale mask in the gloom. "You coming, or are you gonna stand there all night?" With a heavy heart, I followed him. The inside of the mine was a different world. The air was cold and still, and the silence was absolute. The only sound was the crunch of our boots on the gravelly floor and the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing a long, narrow tunnel that stretched into the blackness as far as we could see. Old, rusted ore cart tracks ran down the center of the tunnel, disappearing into the oppressive dark. We walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the mountain. The main tunnel branched off into smaller, narrower ones, creating a confusing, disorienting labyrinth. We had a ball of twine that we were supposed to be using to mark our path, but in our excitement, we had forgotten to tie it to the entrance. A stupid, childish mistake that would almost cost us our lives. The further we went, the more I felt it, a growing sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. The whispers started soon after, faint at first, just on the edge of hearing. I thought it was just the wind or my imagination, but then they grew louder, more distinct. They were coming from all around us, from the very walls of the mine. They were whispering our names, Jakey, Michael. Jake heard them too. The cocky grin had vanished from his face, replaced by a look of wide-eyed fear. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my own voice barely a croak. I think we should go back." But when we turned around, we didn't know which way to go. The branching tunnels all looked the same. We were lost. Panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating panic that made it hard to breathe. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were laughing now, a cruel, mocking laughter that echoed through the dark tunnels. Then our flashlights started to flicker, both of them, at the same time. They would dim, then brighten, then dim again, plunging us into intermittent, terrifying darkness. In one of the brief flashes of light, I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the tunnel. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. It was a silhouette against the darkness, so I couldn't make out any features. But I could see its eyes. Two small, red pinpricks of light that glowed with a malevolent intelligence. The figure took a step towards us, its movements slow and jerky, and it raised a hand. At the end of its long, spindly arm was a mining pick. We ran. We didn't know where we were going, we just ran. Away from the figure with the glowing red eyes and the mining pick. The whispers were all around us now, a cacophony of mocking, hateful voices. Our flashlights died completely, plunging us into a darkness so absolute it felt like a physical weight. We stumbled through the blackness, our hands outstretched, feeling our way along the cold, damp walls of the tunnel. We fell. We got up. We kept running. We were crying, screaming, calling for help. But there was no one to hear us. No one but the whispering things in the dark. I don't know how we found our way out. It was a miracle. A sheer, blind stroke of luck. We saw a faint, gray light ahead of us and we ran towards it. We burst out of the mine and into the pre-dawn light, gasping for air, our clothes torn, our bodies bruised and scraped. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of my house. We collapsed on the porch, sobbing with relief and terror. My dad found us there a few minutes later. He took one look at us and knew where we had been. He didn't yell. He didn't punish us. He just held us, and I could feel him trembling. That night, he told me the real story of the Morning Star. He told me that in 1923, there had been a terrible cave-in. 30 miners were trapped. They were down there for weeks. When the rescue party finally reached them, they found only one survivor, a man named Elias Thorne. He had survived by eating the others. They said he had gone mad in the darkness, that he had become something not quite human. He died a few years later in an asylum, but they say his spirit never left the mine, that he still wanders its dark tunnels, a gaunt, cannibalistic specter, forever hungry. And the whispers are the voices of his victims, forever trapped in the darkness with the thing that devoured them. Jake and I never spoke of what we saw in the mine. We didn't have to. The memory of it was seared into our minds. The memory of the absolute darkness, the mocking whispers, and the tall, gaunt figure with the glowing red eyes. Silver Creek is a ghost town now. The people are gone. The houses are empty. But the Morning Star is still there, a dark, gaping wound in the side of the mountain. And sometimes, on a quiet night, if you listen closely, they say you can still hear the whispers, the voices of the dead forever trapped in the darkness, and the faint, chilling tapping of a mining pick on rock. There's a farm on the outskirts of my hometown in rural Ohio that no one goes near after dark. It's the old Miller farm. It's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. The house is a dilapidated, two-story Victorian with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The barn is a skeletal wreck, its roof caved in, its walls groaning with every gust of wind. But it's the cornfield that's the most unsettling. A vast, sprawling sea of corn that stretches as far as the eye can see. And in the center of that field, there's a scarecrow. It's not just any scarecrow. It's a monstrous thing, at least 8 feet tall, with a body made of old, rotting burlap sacks, and a head that's a grotesquely large, misshapen pumpkin. Its arms are long, twisted branches, and its fingers are rusty, wicked-looking scythes. Its face is a crude, leering jack-o'-lantern's grin with 2 black, empty sockets for eyes. It's been there for as long as anyone can remember, a silent, menacing sentinel watching over the dead and dying corn. The story goes that Old Man Miller was a bitter, cruel man. He hated everyone and everything, and he was obsessed with his cornfield. He believed it was the best corn in the state, and he would do anything to protect it. One year, after a particularly bad crow infestation, he built the scarecrow. But he didn't just use old clothes and straw. They say he used other things. The bones of animals he'd caught in his traps, the hair of a drifter who had disappeared from town a few weeks earlier. And for the heart, he used a strange, pulsating rock he'd found in the center of his field. A rock that was warm to the touch, even on the coldest of days. After he built the scarecrow, the crows never came back. But other things started to happen. People started to disappear. Mostly drifters and vagrants, people no one would miss. Their last known whereabouts were always near the Miller farm. Old Man Miller just smiled his thin, cruel smile and said he hadn't seen a thing. Then, one night, the Miller's house caught fire. It burned to the ground with Old Man Miller and his wife inside. The fire department said it was an accident. Faulty wiring. But some people whispered that they'd seen a tall, lurching figure silhouetted against the flames, a figure that looked an awful lot like the scarecrow from the cornfield. That was 50 years ago. The farm has been abandoned ever since, but the scarecrow is still there, and the stories have never stopped. They say that on some nights, when the moon is full and the wind is just right, the scarecrow comes down from its cross. They say it walks the rows of corn, its scythe like fingers dragging in the dirt. And they say that if you're foolish enough to be out on that road after dark, you might just see it. And if you do, you'll never be seen again. When I was in high school, it was a local rite of passage to go out to the Miller farm on Halloween night and try to touch the scarecrow. It was a stupid, childish dare, fueled by teenage bravado and cheap beer. My friends and I decided to do it our senior year. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Mark, and our girlfriends, Jenny and Lisa. We parked my car on the side of the road and made our way through the overgrown weeds towards the cornfield. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the rustling of the dead corn stalks in the wind. The full moon cast an eerie, silvery light over the scene, making the dilapidated farmhouse and the skeletal barn look even more menacing. We found the path into the cornfield and started to make our way towards the center. The corn was dry and brittle, and the stalks towered over our heads, creating a claustrophobic, disorienting maze. It was impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The rustling of the corn seemed to be coming from all around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the clearing in the center of the field, and there it was, the scarecrow. It was even more terrifying in person. A hulking, monstrous figure, its grotesque pumpkin head leering down at us with its empty, black eyes. The moonlight glinted off the rusty scythes that served as its fingers. It was so still, so silent, but it felt alive, like it was aware of our presence, like it was waiting. Mark, who was always the brave one, scoffed. "It's just a bunch of old rags and a pumpkin," he said, his voice a little too loud in the oppressive silence. He took a swig of beer and started to walk towards it. "Don't, Mark," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's just go." But Mark wasn't listening. He was determined to prove how brave he was. He reached the scarecrow and slapped its burlap chest. "See," he said with a triumphant grin, "nothing to be afraid of." And then the scarecrow moved. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight turn of its pumpkin head, but it was enough. Its empty, black sockets seemed to fix on Mark. The leering grin on its face seemed to widen. We all screamed. Mark stumbled backwards, his face a mask of pure terror. We turned and ran, crashing through the brittle cornstalks, not caring where we were going, just trying to get away. I could hear it behind us. A heavy, lurching sound. The sound of something large and unnatural moving through the corn. The rustling was frantic now, a cacophony of panicked, whispering voices. We burst out of the cornfield and ran for the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into drive, peeling out onto the road. As we sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw it. The scarecrow, standing at the edge of the cornfield. It was holding something in its scythe, like hands. A tattered piece of blue fabric, the same color as Mark's jacket. We never went back to the Miller farm. We never spoke of what happened that night. We tried to forget. But some things you can't forget. A few weeks later, Mark started having nightmares. He would wake up screaming, talking about the scarecrow. He said it was coming for him, that it wanted him back in the cornfield. He started losing weight. He became withdrawn and paranoid. His parents took him to doctors, to therapists. But nothing helped. One night, he disappeared. His bedroom window was open, and there were muddy footprints on the floor. The police searched for weeks. They found nothing. It was like he had vanished from the face of the earth. I know where he is. I know what happened to him. He's in the cornfield. He's with the scarecrow. And sometimes on a quiet, moonlit night, I think I can hear him. A faint, desperate whisper carried on the wind, calling my name, begging me to come and play. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey is a vast, sprawling wilderness of pitch pines and sandy soil. It's a place of strange beauty and even stranger legends. They say it's home to the Jersey Devil, a monstrous, winged creature with the head of a horse and the cloven hooves of a goat. I've lived on the edge of the Pine Barrens my whole life, and while I've never seen the Jersey Devil, I've seen something else, something worse. My dad was a forest ranger. He knew the Pine Barrens like the back of his hand. He taught me how to track, how to read the signs of the forest, how to survive in the wilderness. He also taught me to respect the woods, to be aware of its dangers. He told me that there were things in the Pine Barrens that were older than the trees, older than the hills, things that it was best not to disturb. When I was in my early 20s, I used to go on long, multi-day hikes into the deep woods. I loved the solitude, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the modern world. I would camp out under the stars, listen to the sounds of the forest, and feel a sense of peace that I couldn't find anywhere else. It was on one of these hikes, in the late summer of 2010, that I had my encounter. I was deep in a part of the Barrens that was rarely visited, a remote area of dense pine forest and swampy, cedar-choked streams. I had set up my camp for the night in a small clearing near an old, abandoned cranberry bog. As the sun began to set, the forest grew quiet. The usual chorus of birds and insects fell silent. It was a strange, unnatural silence. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. But the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. I was sitting by my small campfire, cooking my dinner, when I felt it. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. I scanned the trees around my campsite, but I couldn't see anything. I told myself it was just my imagination. The woods can play tricks on you, especially when you're alone. But the feeling persisted. It grew stronger, more intense. It was a feeling of pure, malevolent intent. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. I shined the light into the trees, sweeping it back and forth. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense wall of pine trees. But there was nothing there. Then I heard it. A faint chittering sound, like a large insect. It was coming from the darkness just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. I froze, straining my ears to listen. The chittering grew louder, closer. It was being answered by other, similar sounds, coming from different directions. I was surrounded. I backed away towards the fire, my hand reaching for the hunting knife on my belt. The chittering was all around me now, a symphony of unnerving, insect-like clicks and whistles. I could hear movement in the underbrush, the sound of something large, moving with a strange, scuttling gait. Then, I saw them. They emerged from the darkness at the edge of the clearing. There were 3 of them. They were tall, at least 6 feet, and impossibly thin. Their bodies were a dark, mottled gray, like the bark of a dead tree. They had no hair, no discernible features, just smooth, androgynous forms. Their limbs were long and jointed, like an insect's, and they moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. But it was their heads that were the most horrifying. They were small and round, and they had no faces. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, blank expanse of skin. And yet, I knew they were looking at me. I could feel their soulless, unseen gaze boring into me. They stopped at the edge of the firelight, their faceless heads tilted as if in curiosity. The chittering sound was coming from them, a low, constant hum that vibrated in my chest. I was paralyzed with a fear so absolute, so profound, that it was almost a religious experience. I felt small, insignificant, a tiny, fragile creature in the presence of something ancient and utterly alien. One of them took a step forward, its long, insect-like leg extending into the firelight. I could see that its feet ended in long, sharp talons like a bird of prey. It raised one of its long, thin arms, and I saw that its fingers were like needles, long and sharp and black. That's when I ran. I don't know where the strength came from, but I turned and fled into the darkness, leaving my campsite, my gear, everything behind. I ran blindly through the woods, the branches of the pine trees whipping at my face, the thorns of the briar patches tearing at my clothes. I could hear them behind me. The sound of their scuttling, insect-like pursuit. The chittering was louder now, more excited. It was the sound of a predator closing in on its prey. I don't know how long I ran. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed at the base of a large pine tree, convinced that I was about to die. I closed my eyes and waited for the end, but it never came. After a long time, I opened my eyes. The forest was silent again. The chittering was gone. I was alone. I waited until the sun came up before I moved. I made my way back to my campsite, my body aching, my mind in a state of shock. My camp was just as I had left it. My tent, my backpack, my food, it was all untouched. It was like they hadn't been interested in my things. They had only been interested in me. I packed up my camp and I walked out of the pine barrens. It took me the rest of the day. I didn't stop, I didn't rest. I just walked. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. I never went back into the deep woods again. I sold my camping gear. I got a job in the city. I tried to forget what I had seen, but I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The tall, thin figures with the faceless heads and the insect-like limbs. I can hear their chittering voices, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that there are things in this world that we are not meant to understand. Things that have been here long before us, and will be here long after we are gone. And they are watching us from the shadows. And they are waiting. Of all the tales of the American South, none is more infamous, more thoroughly documented, than that of the Bell Witch. It's a story that has been passed down through generations in my family, not as a piece of folklore, but as a historical account, a dark chapter in our own lineage. You see, I am a direct descendant of John Bell, the patriarch of the family that was tormented by the entity that came to be known as the Bell Witch. And I can tell you, the story you've read in books, the one you've seen in movies, is only a sanitized, palatable version of the truth. The reality was far, far worse. The haunting began in 1817 on my family's farm in Robertson County, Tennessee. It started subtly, strange, knocking sounds on the outside of the log cabin at night, the sound of a dog growling, but no dog to be found, the faint, disembodied whisper of a woman singing hymns. My ancestor, John Bell, a stern, pragmatic man, initially dismissed it as the work of pranksters. But the activity escalated. The invisible entity began to make its presence known in more terrifying ways. It would pull the covers off the beds of the sleeping children. It would slap and pinch them, leaving welts and bruises on their skin. The youngest daughter, Betsy, was the primary target of the witch's torment. Her hair would be pulled, her body stuck with invisible pins. She would be thrown from her bed by an unseen force. The witch, as she came to be called, eventually found her voice. It started as a faint, wheezing whisper, but it grew stronger, until it was a clear, strong voice that could be heard by everyone in the room. She claimed to be the spirit of a woman named Kate Batts, a cantankerous old neighbor with whom John Bell had had a contentious business dealing. Whether this was true, or just a convenient identity for the malevolent entity, no one ever knew for sure. Kate, as she was often called, was a cruel, vindictive, and surprisingly intelligent tormentor. She could quote scripture verbatim, then spew the most vile, blasphemous curses in the next breath. She knew the deepest, darkest secrets of everyone in the family, and she would delight in revealing them at the most inopportune moments. She could be in multiple places at once, tormenting one family member in the house, while simultaneously being heard miles away, talking to a neighbor. My ancestor, John Bell, bore the brunt of the witch's fury. She hated him with a passion that was terrifying in its intensity. She would curse him, mock him, and physically assault him. He began to suffer from a strange affliction of the throat. His tongue would swell, making it difficult for him to speak or swallow. He would have violent seizures that would leave him weak and trembling. The witch would laugh gleefully during these episodes, her disembodied voice crowing with delight at his suffering. The fame of the Bell Witch spread far and wide. People came from all over the country to witness the strange phenomena for themselves. Even Andrew Jackson, then a general and a future president, made a visit to the Bell farm. He and his men were so thoroughly terrified by the witch's antics that they fled in the middle of the night, with Jackson reportedly saying, "I'd rather fight the entire British army than face the Bell Witch again." The haunting continued for 3 long, torturous years. The family was exhausted, terrified, and on the brink of madness, but the worst was yet to come. In the fall of 1820, John Bell's health took a sharp decline. He was confined to his bed, his body racked with pain, his mind clouded by a strange, debilitating stupor. The witch's attacks on him grew more and more vicious. She would not let him rest, her disembodied voice a constant, tormenting presence in his sick room. On the morning of December 20th, John Bell was found dead in his bed. He had not died of his illness. He had been poisoned. A small, strange-looking vial was found near his bed. The witch's triumphant, cackling laughter filled the house as the family made the grim discovery. "I gave old Jack a big dose of this last night," she crowed, "and that fixed him." The death of John Bell is the only case in American history where a death has been officially attributed to supernatural causes. A witch's murder. After John Bell's death, the witch's presence on the farm began to wane. She made a few more appearances, mostly to torment Betsy and to forbid her marriage to a young man named Joshua Gardner, a union she had always vehemently opposed. Broken and terrified, Betsy eventually broke off the engagement. The witch then announced that she would be leaving, but she promised to return in 7 years, and she did. In 1828, she returned to torment John Bell Jr. for a few weeks before disappearing again. Her final promise was that she would return one last time in 7 years to one of John Bell's descendants. That would have been in 1935, to my great-grandfather. He never spoke of what, if anything, happened that year. But he was a changed man for the rest of his life. A quiet, somber man who would often stare into the distance, a look of profound sadness and fear in his eyes. The story of the Bell Witch is not just a ghost story to my family. It's a wound, a generational trauma that has been passed down through the blood. We don't talk about it much. It's too dark, too personal. But we all know it. We all feel it. The shadow of what happened on that small farm in Tennessee 200 years ago. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I think I can hear it. A faint, wheezing whisper. The sound of an old woman singing a forgotten hymn, and I feel a cold, ancestral fear grip my heart, and I wonder, has she returned? Is she still watching us? Still waiting? And I know, with a certainty that runs deeper than my own blood, that some things never truly die. They just wait.